In the quiet village of St. Mary Mead, Sycamore Street hides a chilling secret. When widow Elspeth Gray vanishes from her cottage, Miss Jane Marple, with her sharp eyes and knitting needles, uncovers a trail of clues. A burned photograph, a mysterious letter, a stolen emerald, a stranger in a grey coat, a shady cousin, and a midnight meeting at the old mill led to danger. Can Miss Marple unravel the truth before the silence hides a crime forever? Chapter 1. The Quiet of Sycamore Street. The sun climbed slowly over St. Mary Mead, painting the village in soft gold. Miss Jane Marple sat in her garden, her knitting needles moving with a steady click-clack. Roses bloomed around her, their sweet smell mixing with the warm summer air. Her small cottage, with its white walls and tidy thatch, faced Sycamore Street, a short lane of neat houses where nothing much ever happened. But today, something felt wrong. The street was too quiet, like a clock that had stopped ticking. No chatter spilled from Mrs. Price's tea shop. No rumble came from Mr. Harrow's delivery van. And even young Tommy Bell, the paper boy, wasn't whistling his usual tune. Miss Marple's sharp blue eyes scanned the lane. She was an old lady, with white hair tucked under a lace cap, but her mind was as quick as ever. She noticed things others missed, like the way a curtain twitched, or a voice dropped low. Years of watching people in St. Mary Mead had taught her that even the smallest detail, a lost button, a hurried glance, could unravel a secret. Today, the silence on Sycamore Street was a detail she couldn't ignore. She set her knitting on the wicker table and sipped her tea, now cold in its china cup. Her garden gate creaked as Lily, her young maid, came back from the grocer's. Lily's cheeks were pink from the walk, and her brown curls bounced under her cap. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice low, "there's talk at Mr. Puddle's shop. They say Mrs. Elspeth Gray, the new widow at number 12, hasn't been seen since Tuesday." Lily's eyes were wide, eager for a reaction. Miss Marple's needles paused mid-stitch. "Tuesday, you say?" she asked, her tone calm but curious. Elspeth Gray had moved to Sycamore Street just a month ago, after her husband, a sea captain, died. She was a quiet woman, maybe 50, with greying hair and a habit of keeping to herself. She rented the small cottage at number 12, a place with ivy on its walls and a garden full of lavender. Miss Marple had seen her once, carrying a basket of flowers, her face pale and her eyes always looking down. "Has anyone checked on her?" Miss Marple asked. Lily shook her head. "Mrs. Tuttle, her neighbour, knocked yesterday, but got no answer. The postman says her letters are piling up." Lily leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Some think she's run off, maybe to London. Others say, well, something bad." Miss Marple smiled faintly. Village gossip was like a spider's web, fragile but sticky, catching every rumour. "Let's not jump to stories, Lily," she said. "Mrs. Gray might be visiting family, or perhaps she's unwell." But her mind was already turning, sifting through possibilities. A woman living alone, new to the village, gone without a word. It wasn't right. She decided to take her afternoon walk along Sycamore Street to see for herself. She put on her straw hat, tied with a blue ribbon, and picked up her walking stick. The lane was peaceful, lined with cottages that glowed in the sunlight. Roses, climbed over fences, and bees buzzed lazily. But as she reached number 12, the air felt heavy, like before a storm. The cottage looked asleep, its curtains drawn tight, its gate locked with a rusty chain. The lavender in the garden was wilting, as if no one had watered it. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. A house could tell you things if you knew how to look. Across the lane, Mrs. Clara Tuttle was sweeping her porch. Clara was a thin woman, always, nervous with hands that twisted together like vines. Her grey dress fluttered as she worked, her broom scratching the stone steps. "Good afternoon, Clara," Miss Marple called, her voice gentle but clear. Clara jumped, her broom clattering. "Oh, Miss Marple, you startled me." She brushed a strand of hair from her face, her eyes darting to number 12. "I was just tidying," Miss Marple smiled, leaning on her stick. "A fine day for it. Have you seen Mrs. Gray lately? Lily says she's been away." Clara's hands twisted harder. "Not since Tuesday, miss. I knocked on her door Wednesday, thinking she might need company, you know, being a widow and all, but no one answered. Her posts piling up, letters, papers, even a parcel." She glanced at the cottage, her voice dropping. "It's not like her. She's quiet, but she always nods hello." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps she's gone to visit someone," she said, testing Clara's reaction. "A friend, maybe." Clara shook her head. She never spoke of friends, kept to herself mostly, though. She hesitated, then leaned closer. "I saw her talking to a man last week at her gate. Tall, in a grey coat. He looked cross, and she was shaking her head like she didn't want him there." Miss Marple's heart gave a little jump, but her face stayed calm. "A man, you say? Did you know him?" "No, miss. Not from the village. His hat was pulled low, so I didn't see his face, but his voice was sharp, like he was giving orders." Clara shivered, though the sun was warm. "I didn't like it." "Thank you, Clara," Miss Marple said kindly. "You've been very helpful." She turned back to number 12, her mind racing. A stranger, an argument, a missing woman. The pieces didn't fit yet, but they were starting to form a picture. She thought of her nephew Raymond, who wrote detective stories. He always said city troubles followed people to quiet places. Had Mrs. Gray brought trouble with her? As she walked back to her cottage, the village came alive around her. Children ran past laughing, their shoes kicking up dust. Mr. Harrow's van rumbled by, its engine coughing. At the tea shop, Mrs. Price was wiping tables, her apron spotted with flour. Miss Marple decided to stop in. The shop was cosy, with lace curtains and the smell of fresh scones. A few villagers sat at tables, their voices low. Mrs. Price, a plump woman with a quick smile, waved her over. "Miss Marple, come for tea?" "Just a chat," Miss Marple said, settling into a chair. "I hear Mrs. Gray hasn't been seen. Do you know her?" Mrs. Price's smile faded. "Not much. She came in once, ordered scones and tea, kept looking out the window, like she was expecting someone, paid with a crumpled note, and I saw a letter in her bag, thick with a foreign stamp, looked important." She leaned closer, her voice a whisper. "She seemed nervous, miss, not like someone on holiday." Miss Marple's fingers tightened on her stick. A foreign letter, a nervous widow, a stranger in a grey coat. The silence on Sycamore Street was starting to speak. She thanked Mrs. Price and walked home, her steps slow, but her mind fast. Back in her garden, she picked up her knitting, the needles clicking again. She thought of her friend Mrs. Bantry, who loved to tell stories of wartime secrets and hidden letters. Could Mrs. Gray's letter be a clue? Or was it just a bill, a note from a cousin? The afternoon turned to evening, and the village settled into dusk. Lights glowed in cottage windows, but number 12 stayed dark. Miss Marple sat by her fire, her knitting in her lap. She thought of the drawn curtains, the wilting lavender, the piled-up post. She thought of Clara's nervous hands and the man in the grey coat. Most of all, she thought of Mrs. Gray, a woman alone, now gone without a trace. She decided to speak to Constable Harris in the morning. He was a young man, eager but not always sharp. Still, he respected her, and she could persuade him to check number 12. If Mrs. Gray was truly missing, the cottage might hold answers. A locked gate, a cold teacup, a torn letter, small things. But Miss Marple knew small things could break a case wide open. As she went to bed, the silence of Sycamore Street lingered in her mind. It wasn't just quiet. It was the kind of quiet that hid something, like a shadow behind a curtain. And Miss Jane Marple, with her knitting and her sharp eyes, was determined to find out what. Chapter 2. The Locked Cottage. The morning sun spilled over St. Mary Mead, warming the cobblestones and waking the sparrows. Miss Jane Marple sat at her breakfast table, a slice of toast untouched beside her teacup. Her mind wasn't on the meal. It was on Sycamore Street, where the quiet cottage at number 12 held secrets she couldn't shake. Yesterday's walk had left her uneasy. The drawn curtains, the wilting lavender, Clara Tuttle's nervous words about a stranger. Mrs. Elspeth Gray, the widow who'd vanished, was a puzzle, and Miss Marple loved puzzles. She dabbed her lips. With a napkin and rose, her black shawl draped over her shoulders. Today she'd visit Constable Harris. He was a good lad, full of energy but short on imagination. If number 12 was to give up its secrets, she'd need his help to get inside. She put on her hat, its brim wide and practical, and stepped into the village. The air smelled of fresh bread from the bakery and dew on the grass. Children skipped past, their laughter sharp in the morning calm. But Sycamore Street felt distant, like a place holding its breath. At the police station, a small building with a sagging roof, Constable Harris was polishing his boots. His round face lit up when he saw her. "Miss Marple, what brings you here so early?" he asked, brushing dust from his hands. "Good morning, Robert," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I'm worried about Mrs. Gray at number 12. No one's seen her in days. Her post is piling up and her neighbours are concerned. Could you check her cottage, just to be sure she's safe?" Harris scratched his head, his cap tilting. "Mrs. Gray, the quiet one? Probably visiting someone, miss. Folks do leave without telling." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. "Perhaps. But a quick look wouldn't hurt, would it? For peace of mind." Harris nodded, eager to please. "Right, then. I'll fetch the keys. The landlord, Mr. Stokes, has a spare." He grabbed his coat, and they set off for Sycamore Street. The lane was as still as yesterday, the cottages basking in sunlight. Number 12 looked no different. Gate locked, windows dark, lavender drooping. Miss Marple's fingers tightened on her walking stick. A house could hide things, she knew, like a locked box waiting for the right key. Mr. Stokes, a gruff man with a limp, met them at the gate. "Don't know why you're fussing," he muttered, handing over a rusty key. "Mrs. Gray pays her rent on time, probably off with friends." But his eyes flicked to the cottage, uneasy. Harris unlocked the gate, and they stepped into the garden. The path was overgrown, weeds poking through the stones. At the front door, Harris knocked loudly. "Mrs. Gray, it's the police." No answer. He turned the key, but the door stuck. With a shove, it creaked open, releasing a puff of stale air. Miss Marple followed, her steps careful, her eyes scanning every corner. Inside, the cottage was dim, the air heavy with dust. The sitting room was tidy, with a faded sofa and a small table holding a vase of wilted flowers. A clock on the mantel had stopped at 3 o'clock. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on it. "When did it stop?" she murmured, touching the clock's face. Harris shrugged, poking his head into the kitchen. The kitchen was small, with a single teacup on the table, its contents dark and cold. A plate held a half-eaten scone, crumbs scattered like clues. Miss Marple bent closer, her shawl brushing the table. The teacup's rim had a faint lipstick mark, pink and smudged. "She was here," she said softly, "and left in a hurry." Harris opened a cupboard, finding only jars of jam and a tin of biscuits. "No sign of a fight," he said, scratching his chin. "Maybe she just stepped out." Miss Marple moved to the fireplace, where ashes lay in a heap. Something caught her eye. A scrap of paper, half-burned, curled among the cinders. She knelt, her knees creaking, and picked it up with a handkerchief. It was part of a photograph, showing the edge of a man's face. His jaw sharp, but his features charred away. "Curious," she said, tucking it into her pocket. "Who burns a picture and leaves it behind?" Harris checked the back door. "It's unlocked," he called, frowning. "No key in the lock, though." Miss Marple joined him, noting the door's hinges were rusty, as if rarely used. The garden beyond was wild, with tall grass and a broken fence. "Someone could have come this way," she said, pointing to scuffed dirt near the step. Harris nodded, but his face said he wasn't convinced. They searched upstairs. The bedroom was simple. A narrow bed, a wardrobe, a mirror with a crack. A shawl hung over a chair, its threads fraying. Miss Marple opened the wardrobe, finding dresses in muted colours, neatly hung. A small box held a few letters, tied with string, but they were bills, nothing personal. "She didn't plan to leave," Miss Marple said. "Her things are here, untouched." Harris sighed. "Looks like she just walked out, miss. Maybe she'll turn up tomorrow." Miss Marple's lips pressed thin. "Or someone wanted it to look that way." She thought of her friend Dolly Bantry, who once found a body in her library. Dolly would say a house like this, so neat yet so wrong, was hiding something big. The teacup, the photograph, the unlocked door, they were pieces of a story, and Miss Marple meant to read it. Back in the village, gossip was spreading like wildfire. At the tea shop, Mrs. Price was serving scones to a cluster of women, their voices buzzing. Miss Marple slipped inside, her shawl brushing the doorframe. "Good day, Mrs. Price," she said, taking a seat by the window. The shop smelled of sugar and tea, its tables crowded with chattering neighbours. Mrs. Price bustled over, wiping her hands on her apron. Miss Marple, heard you were at number 12. Any news?" "Not yet," Miss Marple said, her tone light. "But you saw Mrs. Gray last week, didn't you? With a letter?" Mrs. Price nodded, her eyes bright with gossip. "Aye, a thick one, foreign stamp." She was fidgety, kept checking the door. "And another thing, she dropped her purse and a ring fell out. Green stone, like an emerald." She snatched it up quick like it was a secret. Miss Marple's heart skipped, but her face stayed calm. An emerald ring, a burned photograph, a stranger in a grey coat. The pieces were piling up, each one sharp-edged. She thanked Mrs. Price and sipped her tea, her mind turning like a wheel. She thought of her nephew Raymond, whose detective stories always had a hidden treasure or a secret past. Was Mrs. Gray hiding something valuable, or running from it? As she left the shop, a new figure caught her eye. A man stood by the Sycamore Street postbox, tall and polished in a dark suit. His hair was slicked back, his eyes quick and darting. He was speaking to Tommy Bell, the paper boy, who looked uneasy. Miss Marple slowed her steps, pretending to adjust her hat. She heard the man say, "Mrs. Gray's house, number 12, yes?" Tommy nodded, scuffing his shoes. The man tipped his hat and walked toward number 12. Miss Marple followed at a distance, her stick tapping softly. At the cottage, he knocked, then peered through a window when no one answered. "Interesting," she murmured. She caught up to Tommy, who was tossing pebbles into a puddle. "Tommy," she said, offering a peppermint from her bag, "who was that man?" Tommy popped the candy in his mouth. "Dunno, miss. Said he's Mrs. Gray's cousin, come to check on her. Called himself Mr. Finch. Asked if she lived alone. His voice was all fancy, but his eyes were cold." Miss Marple thanked him, her mind racing. A cousin appearing now, when Mrs. Gray was gone? She thought of her friend Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife, who'd mentioned an argument at number 12. Had Mr. Finch been the man in the grey coat? Or was he someone else, drawn by the same secret? She decided to visit the vicarage. Mrs. Clement was in her garden, pruning roses. Her round face brightened at Miss Marple's approach. "Jane, come for tea," she called, waving her shears. "Perhaps later," Miss Marple said, settling on a bench. "I'm curious about Mrs. Gray. You mentioned an argument last week, Mrs. Clement nodded, brushing dirt from her gloves. "Oh, yes. I was passing number 12 and I heard voices, hers and a man's. He was loud, saying something about giving it back." She sounded scared, kept saying, "I can't." "I didn't see him, but it wasn't friendly." Miss Marple's fingers traced the handle of her stick. "And now a Mr. Finch claims to be her cousin. He's at her cottage today." Mrs. Clement's eyes widened. "A cousin?" She never mentioned family. Mind you, she was private. Only came to church once, sat in the back. As Miss Marple walked home, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows. Sycamore Street was still quiet, number 12 a dark smudge against the golden light. She thought of the teacup, left mid-sip, the photograph burned but not destroyed, the back door unlocked. She thought of Mr. Finch, with his cold eyes and sudden arrival. Most of all, she thought of Mrs. Gray, a woman who'd come to St. Mary, Mead, to escape something or someone. At her cottage, Miss Marple lit a fire, the flames dancing in the grate. She took out the burned photograph scrap, holding it to the light. The man's jaw was all she could see. but it was enough to make her wonder. Was he the stranger in the grey coat, the man from the argument, or someone else tied to the emerald ring? She settled into her armchair, her knitting untouched. Tomorrow she'd return to number 12. The cottage had more to say, she was sure. A loose floorboard, a hidden letter, a forgotten key. Small things, but Miss Marple knew small things could crack a mystery wide open. As the fire crackled, the silence of Sycamore Street seemed to whisper, and she was listening. Chapter 3. The Stranger's Visit. The morning mist clung to St. Mary Mead, wrapping the village in a soft grey blanket. Miss Jane Marple stood at her cottage window, her hands folded over her shawl, watching the world wake up. Sycamore Street lay quiet, its cottages half hidden in the fog. Number 12, Mrs. Elspeth Gray's home, seemed to crouch under the weight of its secrets. Yesterday's visit to the cottage, the cold teacup, the burned photograph, the unlocked back door, had left Miss Marple restless. The arrival of Mr. Lawrence Finch, claiming to be Mrs. Gray's cousin, only sharpened her curiosity. People didn't appear so suddenly without reason, she knew, and reasons were rarely innocent. She sipped her tea, the steam curling under her chin, and planned her day. The village was buzzing with talk of Mrs. Gray's absence, and Miss Marple wanted to hear more. Gossip, like a loose thread, could unravel a mystery if you pulled it gently. She decided to start at the Sycamore Street postbox, where young Tommy Bell, the paper boy, had spoken to Mr. Finch. Boys like Tommy noticed things, even if they didn't know it. Miss Marple pinned her hat, its blue ribbon slightly frayed, and stepped into the cool morning. The village smelled of damp earth and baking bread. Sparrows chirped from the hedgerows, and a milk cart rattled past, its bottles clinking. She walked slowly, her stick tapping the path, her eyes sharp behind her spectacles. Sycamore Street was still, the mist curling around number 12 like a cat. The cottage's windows were dark, its gate locked tight. She paused, noting a fresh footprint in the mud by the gate. A man's boot, deep and deliberate. At the postbox, Tommy Bell was stuffing newspapers into his bag. His cap was crooked, and his cheeks were red from the cold. "Morning, Miss Marple," he said, tossing a paper to a nearby porch. "You're up early." "Good morning, Tommy," she replied, offering a smile and a peppermint from her bag. "I wanted to ask about that man you met yesterday, Mr. Finch. Did he say anything else about Mrs. Gray?" Tommy sucked on the candy, his eyes narrowing. "He was nosy, miss. Asked if Mrs. Gray lived alone, how often I saw her. Said he was her cousin, but his voice was sharp, like he was digging for something. Then he asked about Monday. Said he heard a man was at her gate." Tommy kicked a pebble, his face uneasy. "I told him I saw a stranger that day, in a grey coat, hat pulled low. He was talking to Mrs. Gray, sounding cross. Mr. Finch got real, quiet after that, like he didn't like what I said." Miss Marple's fingers tightened on her stick. "A stranger on Monday? Tell me more, Tommy." The boy shrugged, slinging his bag over his shoulder. "Didn't see his face. He was tall, moved quick, asked me if Mrs. Gray got many visitors. I said no, and he walked off toward the station. His voice was rough, not like Mr. Finch's fancy talk." Tommy hesitated, then added, "Mrs. Gray looked scared that day, miss. Kept glancing over her shoulder." Miss Marple thanked him, her mind spinning. a stranger in a grey coat, asking questions, arguing with Mrs. Grey. Now Mr. Finch, appearing days later, probing the same ground. She thought of her friend Mrs. Bantry, who loved tales of spies and hidden pasts. Was Mrs. Grey caught in something bigger than a village quarrel? The emerald ring Mrs. Price had mentioned, a green stone, quickly hidden, felt like a key. But to what? She headed to the tea shop, where the village's pulse beat strongest. The shop was warm, its windows steamed from the kettle. Mrs. Price was behind the counter, her apron dusted with flour, serving tea to old Mr. Harrow, the delivery man. His van was parked outside, its paint chipped but proud. Miss Marple settled at a corner table, her shawl draped over the chair. "Good morning, Mrs. Price," she said, her voice gentle. "Any news today?" Mrs. Price bustled over, her eyes bright with gossip. "Plenty, Miss Marple. That Mr. Finch was here this morning, asking about Mrs. Grey. Wanted to know who she talked to, what she did. Said he's handling her affairs, but he didn't look worried. Not like a cousin should." She lowered her voice. "And another thing. Mrs. Grey came in last Monday, before she vanished. She was carrying a small bag, like she was going somewhere. Dropped it when she paid, and a key fell out. Old, heavy, not like a house key. She grabbed it quick, like it was precious." Miss Marple's heart gave a little jump, but her face stayed calm. "A key, you say? Interesting." She sipped her tea, her mind racing. A key, an emerald ring, a burned photograph. Each clue was a thread, weaving a pattern she couldn't yet see. "Did she say where she was going?" she asked. Mrs. Price shook her head. "Not a word. Just paid and left, looking out the window. The whole time, I reckon she was scared of someone following her." Miss Marple thanked her and turned to Mr. Harrow, who was stirring sugar into his tea. "Mr. Harrow, you deliver on Sycamore Street, don't you? Did you notice anything odd at number 12 last week?" The old man rubbed his chin, his fingers stained with engine oil. "Come to think of it, miss, I saw a man there Monday evening, tall grey coat, standing by the gate. Didn't look like he belonged. Mrs. Grey was at her window, then she shut the curtains quick. I thought it was strange, but I had deliveries to make." Miss Marple nodded, her mind fitting pieces together. The stranger in the grey coat, seen by Tommy and Mr. Harrow, arguing with Mrs. Grey. Now Mr. Finch, claiming kinship, asking questions. She thought of her nephew Raymond's stories, where city folk brought trouble to quiet villages. Was Mrs. Grey hiding from someone or hiding something? She left the tea shop and walked to the vicarage, hoping Mrs. Clement might have more to share. The vicarage garden was bright with roses, their petals scattered on the grass. Mrs. Clement was weeding, her straw hat bobbing. "Jane," she called, brushing dirt from her hands. "Come to gossip?" Miss Marple smiled, settling on a bench. "Just curious about Mrs. Grey. You heard her arguing last week. Did you notice anything else?" Mrs. Clement sat beside her, her face serious. "I didn't think much of it then, but Tuesday night I saw her walking toward the old mill. She had a small bag, and she kept looking back, like someone was following. It was late, near midnight. I thought it odd for a widow to be out so late." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. The old mill, a crumbling ruin on the edge of St. Mary Mead, was a place of local tales. Smugglers, ghosts, hidden loot. "The mill?" she said softly. "That's a strange place to go at night." Mrs. Clement nodded. "I didn't see her come back. And now this Mr. Finch shows up, asking questions. He came to the vicarage yesterday, said he's settling her affairs. But he didn't seem sad, Jane. More like he was hunting for something." Miss Marple's fingers traced her stick's handle. A midnight walk to the mill. A key. A stranger. She thanked Mrs. Clement and walked home. The mist now lifting. The village brightening. Sycamore Street was still quiet. Number 12 a silent sentinel. She passed the cottage, noting Mr. Finch at the gate, his suit crisp, his eyes scanning the windows. He didn't see her, but she saw him, his quick, nervous movements, like a fox sniffing for danger. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple lit a fire, the flames crackling in the grate. She took out the burned photograph scrap from number 12, holding it to the light. The man's jaw was sharp, but the rest was ash. Was he the stranger in the grey coat? The man Mrs. Gray feared? Or someone tied to the key and the emerald? She settled into her armchair, her knitting untouched. The village was full of eyes and ears, but Miss Marple's were the sharpest. Tomorrow she'd visit the mill. A footprint, a dropped handkerchief, a hidden clue, small things, but she knew they could unlock a mystery. As the fire glowed, Sycamore Street's silence seemed to hum, and Miss Marple was listening. Chapter 4. The Hidden Letter. The morning sun broke through the clouds, casting a warm glow over St. Mary Mead. Miss Jane Marple sat in her parlour, her knitting untouched on the table, her sharp blue eyes fixed on the scrap of burned photograph she'd found in Mrs. Gray's cottage. The charred edge showed a man's jaw, strong but unclear, a clue that teased her mind. Sycamore Street was still quiet. Number 12 a silent puzzle. The stranger in the grey coat, the heavy key Mrs. Price saw, Mr. Finch's sudden arrival, and Mrs. Gray's late-night walk to the old mill. They were pieces of a mystery, and Miss Marple was determined to fit them together. She sipped her tea, the cup warm in her hands, and thought about the mill. It was a crumbling place, full of village stories about smugglers and lost treasures. Mrs. Clement's words about Mrs. Gray heading there at midnight stuck with her. Why would a widow go to such a lonely spot? Miss Marple decided to return to number 12. The cottage might hold more secrets, and she had a knack for finding what others missed. She put on her shawl, its edges soft from years of use, and pinned her straw hat. The village was waking up, with the bakery's warm bread smell drifting through the air. Children ran past, their shoes scuffing the path, and Mr. Harrow's delivery van coughed as it turned a corner. Miss Marple walked to Sycamore Street, her stick tapping lightly. Number 12 looked unchanged, curtains drawn, gate locked, lavender drooping in the garden. But something new caught her eye. A fresh scratch on the gate's lock, as if someone had tried to force it. At the cottage next door, Mrs. Clara Tuttle was hanging laundry, her hands quick and nervous. Her grey dress fluttered in the breeze, and she jumped when Miss Marple called, "Good morning, Clara." "Oh, Miss Marple," Clara said, dropping a clothespin. "You're always about, aren't you? Still worrying about Mrs. Gray?" Miss Marple smiled gently. "Just curious. I thought I'd tidy up at number 12 for Mr. Finch. He's her cousin, after all." She watched Clara's face, noting the flicker of doubt in her eyes. "Cousin," Clara muttered, pinning a sheet. "He's an odd one. Came by yesterday, asking if I'd seen Mrs. Gray with anyone. I told him about the man in the grey coat, and he got all stiff like I'd said. Something wrong. Miss Marple nodded, her mind noting the detail. Did you see Mrs. Gray with anything unusual? A bag, perhaps, or a letter? Clara paused, her hands twisting the sheet. Come to think of it, she had a small tin box once when she was watering her flowers. Kept it close, like it was important. I didn't think much of it then. Miss Marple thanked her and approached number 12. Mr. Stokes, the landlord, had given Constable Harris permission to let her tidy up for Mr. Finch, who was staying at the Blue Boar Inn. Harris met her at the gate, his uniform neat, but his face tired. "Morning, Miss Marple," he said, unlocking the door. "Not sure what you'll find. We looked everywhere yesterday." "Sometimes," Miss Marple said softly, "a second look sees more." They stepped inside, the air still stale, the clock on the mantel still stopped at 3. Harris checked the kitchen again, but Miss Marple went to the fireplace. The ashes were undisturbed, the burned photograph gone. She'd taken it home. She knelt, her knees creaking, and sifted through the cinders with a poker. A tiny scrap caught her eye, unburned, showing a man's hand holding a ring. The stone was green, sharp against the charred paper. "An emerald," she murmured, tucking the scrap into her handkerchief. She stood, her eyes scanning the room. The floorboards were old, some loose under the rug. She tapped one with her stick, hearing a hollow sound. "Robert," she called, "help me lift this rug." Harris raised an eyebrow but obeyed, rolling back the faded cloth. One board was slightly raised, its nails loose. Miss Marple pointed, and Harris pried it up with a knife, revealing a small tin box, locked tight. "Well, I'll be," Harris said, lifting it out. The box was heavy, its surface scratched. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face stayed calm. "Can you open it?" she asked. Harris shook his head. "Needs a key. I'll take it to the station." Miss Marple had other ideas. "Let me try," she said, pulling a hairpin from her hat. She'd learned a trick or two from her nephew Raymond's detective stories. With careful twists the lock clicked, and the lid sprang open. Inside was a single letter, its paper yellowed, the handwriting hurried. Miss Marple read it silently. "Elspeth, you mustn't tell. The emerald is the key. Meet me at the old mill, midnight, Tuesday." It was unsigned, the ink smudged by water. Harris whistled. "What's this about an emerald, miss?" Miss Marple folded the letter carefully. "I'm not sure yet, Robert, but this is important. Keep it safe." She thought of the emerald ring Mrs. Price had seen, the burned photograph, the key. The letter tied them together, pointing to the mill. She recalled her friend Dolly Bantry's tale of a stolen jewel that sparked a village feud. Was Mrs. Gray hiding a treasure or running from it? They left the cottage, Harris locking the door. Miss Marple walked to the tea shop, needing to think. The shop was busy, its tables full of villagers sipping tea and whispering about Mrs. Gray. Mrs. Price waved her over, her apron spotted with jam. "Miss Marple, heard you were poking around number 12 again. Find anything?" "Just tidying," Miss Marple said, settling at a table. "You mentioned a key Mrs. Gray dropped. Did you see where she went after?" Mrs. Price nodded, wiping her hands. "Toward the mill, I think. She was in a hurry, clutching that bag of hers. Looked like she didn't want to be followed." Miss Marple's mind raced. The mill again! She thanked Mrs. Price and stepped outside, where she saw Mr. Finch walking down Sycamore Street. His suit was crisp, but his face was tight, his eyes darting to number 12. He stopped at the gate, testing the lock, then walked away quickly. Miss Marple followed at a distance, her stick silent on the grass. He headed to the station, buying a ticket for London. Not staying long, she murmured, noting his haste. Back at her cottage, she sat by the fire, the letter and photograph, scrap on her table. The emerald ring, the midnight meeting, Mr. Finch's nervous steps, they were clues, but not the whole story. She thought of her friend Mrs. Clement's tales of wartime secrets, where letters held codes and rings hid promises. Was Mrs. Gray caught in such a web? She decided to visit the mill tomorrow with Mr. Haydock, the doctor, who had a car and a soft spot for her meddling. The mill might hold more clues. A footprint, a dropped scarf, a hidden box. As the fire crackled, Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Small things, she knew, could break a mystery wide open. Sycamore Street's silence was speaking louder, and she was ready to listen. Chapter 5. The Midnight Meeting. The evening sky over St. Mary Mead was a deep purple, dotted with stars. Miss Jane Marple sat in her parlour, the fire casting shadows on the walls. Her knitting lay untouched, her mind on the letter she'd found in Mrs. Gray's cottage. "Elspeth, you mustn't tell. The emerald is the key. Meet me at the old mill, midnight, Tuesday." The words turned in her head like a puzzle box. Each clue, the burned photograph, the heavy key, Mr. Finch's quick steps, locking into place, but not yet opening. The old mill, where Mrs. Gray was last seen, was the next piece. Miss Marple knew she had to see it for herself. She sipped her tea, the cup cooling in her hands, and thought of the mill's dark reputation. Tucked on the edge of the village, its broken walls and silent wheel were the stuff of local tales, smugglers hiding gold, lovers meeting in secret. Mrs. Clement had seen Mrs. Gray heading there at midnight, carrying a bag, looking scared. Why go to such a lonely place? Miss Marple's sharp eyes gleamed behind her spectacles. She needed to visit the mill, but not alone. Her friend Mr. Haydock, the village doctor, had a car and a fondness for her nosy ways. He'd help. She put on her shawl, its wool soft and warm, and wrote a note to Mr. Haydock, asking him to drive her to the mill that evening. Lily, her maid, took the note, her curls bouncing as she hurried out. Miss Marple then walked to the village square, where the air smelled of wood smoke and damp leaves. The tea shop was quiet, its windows glowing, but Sycamore Street felt heavy, like a book with a missing page. Number 12 stood dark, its gate locked, its secret safe for now. At the postbox, Miss Marple found Tommy Bell, the paper boy, polishing his bicycle. His cap was pushed back, his hands smudged with grease. "Evening, Miss Marple," he said, grinning. "Out for a stroll?" "Just stretching my legs," she replied, offering a peppermint. "Tommy, you deliver near the mill, don't you? Ever see Mrs. Gray there?" Tommy popped the candy in his mouth, thinking, "Not often, miss. But Tuesday night I was out late, snuck out to fish by the river, and I saw her walking that way. She had a bag, small, like she was carrying something, heavy, looked nervous, kept checking behind her. I didn't think much of it till now." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face stayed calm. "Did you see anyone else?" she asked. Tommy nodded. A man, tall, in a grey coat. He was further down the path, near the mill. Didn't see his face, but he moved quick, like he didn't want to be seen. Mrs. Gray stopped when she saw him, then hurried on. Miss Marple thanked him, her mind racing. The stranger in the grey coat, again near the mill at midnight. She thought of her nephew Raymond's detective stories, where nighttime meetings often ended badly. Was Mrs. Gray meeting the stranger, or running from him? The emerald ring, the letter, the key. They pointed to something valuable, something dangerous. Back at her cottage, Mr. Haydock's car pulled up, its engine rumbling. He was a stout man with a kind face, his coat smelling of antiseptic. "Jane, you're meddling again," he said, chuckling as he opened the door. "What's this about the mill?" "Just a hunch," Miss Marple said, climbing in. "Mrs. Gray was seen there Tuesday night. I want to look around." Haydock raised an eyebrow, but drove on, the car bouncing along the narrow road. The mill loomed ahead, its stone walls crumbling, its wheels still against the river. The moon lit the scene, casting long shadows. Miss Marple stepped out, her stick sinking into the muddy path. The air was cold, smelling of moss and old wood. She scanned the ground, her eyes catching two sets of footprints. One small, likely, a woman's one larger, deep and heavy. "Someone was here," she said, pointing. Haydock held a lantern, its light flickering. They followed the prints to the mill's entrance, a gaping doorway choked with ivy. Inside, the floor was dusty, scattered with leaves. Miss Marple's gaze fell on a broken lantern, its glass shattered, lying in a corner. "Look," she whispered, kneeling carefully. The wick was burned, the oil spilled. Someone left in a hurry. Haydock frowned. "Could be kids, Jane. This place is a playground for them." Miss Marple shook her head. "Kids don't come at midnight, and these prints are fresh." She traced a finger along the lantern's edge, finding a smudge of wax. Nearby, a scrap of cloth caught on a nail. A piece of grey wool, like from a coat. She tucked it into her handkerchief, her mind on the stranger Tommy saw. They searched further, the mill's shadows dancing in the lantern's glow. A pile of crates sat against a wall, one tipped over, spilling straw. Miss Marple peered inside, finding nothing but dust. But under the crate, half buried in dirt, was a small button, brass and scratched. She held it up, its surface catching the light. "Not a child's," she said softly. "This belongs to someone older." Haydock sighed. "You see clues everywhere, Jane. What's it mean?" "Maybe nothing," she said. But her eyes said otherwise. She thought of her friend Mrs. Bantry, who once found a button that led to a thief. Small things, she knew, could tell big stories. The footprints, the lantern, the cloth, the button, they pointed to a meeting gone wrong. Back in the car, Haydock drove her home, the night closing in. "You're stirring up trouble, Jane," he said, half teasing. "What's next?" "A talk with Clara Tuttle," Miss Marple replied. "She saw Mrs. Gray that night." At her cottage, she thanked Haydock and sat by the fire, the button and cloth on her table beside the photograph scrap and letter. The mill had confirmed her suspicions. Mrs. Gray had met someone, and it hadn't ended well. But was she hiding or hidden? The next morning, Miss Marple walked to Clara Tuttle's cottage. Clara was in her garden pulling weeds, her hands nervous as ever. "Morning, Miss Marple," she said, brushing dirt from her dress. "Still poking about?" "Just checking on you," Miss Marple said, her tone kind. "Clara, you saw Mrs. Grey Tuesday night heading to the mill. Did you notice anything else?" Clara's eyes darted to number 12. "She was scared, miss. Had a bag, like Tommy said. I saw her from my window. She kept looking back, like someone was following. I thought I heard footsteps after she passed, but it was too dark to see." Miss Marple nodded, her mind adding the detail. "And Mr. Finch, has he been back?" Clara frowned. "Yesterday, he was at number 12 again, looking through the windows. He asked me if Mrs. Grey ever mentioned a ring. I said no, and he left quick, like he was cross." Miss Marple thanked her and walked to the tea shop, where gossip flowed like tea. Mrs. Price was sweeping the floor, her apron tied tight. "Miss Marple, heard you're snooping at the mill now," she said, grinning. "Just curious," Miss Marple replied, sitting by the window. "Did you ever hear Mrs. Grey talk about the mill?" Mrs. Price shook her head. "Not a word, but that Mr. Finch was here again, asking if she ever went there. I told him she kept to herself, but he kept pressing, like he knew something I didn't." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her thoughts on Mr. Finch. His questions, his haste, his interest in the ring, they didn't fit a grieving cousin. She thought of her nephew Raymond's stories, where men like Finch chased hidden fortunes. Was the emerald the key, as the letter said? Back home, she sat by the fire, the clues spread before her. The photograph's emerald ring, the letter's warning, the mill's broken lantern, the grey cloth, the brass button. The midnight meeting had left traces. But where was Mrs. Grey? As the flames crackled, Sycamore Street's silence seemed to pulse, and Miss Marple knew she was close to the truth. Chapter 6. The Emerald's Secret. The morning light crept over St. Mary Mead, painting the rooftops gold. Miss Jane Marple sat at her breakfast table, a cup of tea steaming beside a slice of buttered toast. Her knitting lay untouched, her thoughts tangled in the mystery of Sycamore Street, the clues she'd gathered, the burned photograph, the letter about an emerald, the broken lantern at the mill, the scrap of grey wool, the brass button, were like threads in a tapestry, each one leading to the next. Mrs. Elspeth Grey's midnight trip to the old mill, her fear, and Mr. Finch's suspicious questions pointed to something hidden, something valuable. Miss Marple's sharp eyes gleamed behind her spectacles. Today she'd dig deeper. She pinned her hat, its ribbon slightly faded, and draped her shawl over her shoulders. The village was stirring, with the bakery's warm scent drifting through the air and children's laughter echoing from the square. Sycamore Street was quiet, number 12 still dark, its gate locked tight. Miss Marple decided to visit the village fete, held annually in the church meadow. Fetes were perfect for gossip, and gossip, she knew, could unlock secrets as surely as a key. The meadow was alive with colour. Stalls draped in red and blue, tables piled with jams and cakes, children chasing balloons. Miss Marple wandered through, her stick tapping the grass, her ears open. At the flower stall, she found Miss Lydia Crane, a retired governess with a sharp memory and a love for village history. Lydia's grey hair was pinned neatly, her dress crisp, despite the summer heat. "Good morning, Jane," Lydia said, arranging roses. "Come to buy a bouquet?" "Just looking," Miss Marple replied, her smile gentle. "Lydia, you knew Mrs. Gray's late husband, didn't you? Captain Gray?" Lydia's eyes lit up, eager to share. "Oh, yes. He was a sailor, sailed to India and back. Always brought trinkets, silks, spices, once a carved box. Elspeth showed me a ring years ago, before they moved away. Green stone, an emerald, she said. Called it cursed, tied to a theft in Bombay." She laughed, but her eyes were serious. Miss Marple's heart skipped, but her face stayed calm. "A cursed emerald? That's quite a story." Lydia nodded, clipping a rose. "Captain Gray was proud of it, said it was worth a fortune. Elspeth kept it hidden after he died. Didn't like talking about it." Miss Marple thanked her, her mind racing. An emerald ring, stolen in Bombay, called a curse. It matched the letter's words. "The emerald is the key." She thought of her friend Mrs. Bantry, who loved tales of stolen jewels, sparking feuds. Was Mrs. Gray guarding a secret fortune, or running from its shadow? She moved to the tea tent, where Mrs. Price was serving scones, her apron dusted with sugar. "Miss Marple," she called, waving her over. "Heard you were at the mill. Find anything spooky?" Miss Marple smiled, settling at a table. "Just dust and shadows. Did Mrs. Gray ever mention her husband's travels?" Mrs. Price poured, tea, her eyes bright. "Once she said he brought back odd things from India, statues, jewels. She didn't like them, said they felt unlucky. I saw that ring once, green and shiny. When it fell from her bag, she looked scared like it was trouble." Miss Marple sipped her tea, the clues aligning. The ring, the letter, the mill meeting. They pointed to a past Captain Gray had left behind. She thanked Mrs. Price and walked to the vicarage, where the library held old newspapers. The vicar, Mr. Clement, was sorting hymnals, but welcomed her. "Jane, always snooping," he teased, leading her to the library's dusty shelves. Miss Marple scanned papers from the 1920s, her fingers tracing faded print. A headline caught her eye. "Star of Bombay stolen from merchant's safe." Cheshire. Article described a priceless emerald taken in a daring theft, the thief never caught. Rumours said he fled to England, hiding the gem. Miss Marple's lips pressed thin. Could Captain Gray have been the thief? Had his widow paid for his crime? She left the vicarage, the sun high now, warming the meadow. At the fete, she spotted Mr. Finch near the cake stall, his suit too neat for a village fair. His eyes darted, scanning the crowd. Miss Marple watched, from behind a stall, noting his quick steps towards Sycamore Street. She followed, her stick silent on the grass, keeping to the shadows of the hedgerows. At number 12, Finch stopped, pulling a small parcel from his coat. He glanced around, then slipped through the gate, testing the door. Finding it locked, he moved to the back, disappearing from view. Miss Marple's heart quickened. She hurried to Constable Harris's station, finding him polishing his badge. "Robert," she said, her voice firm, "Mr. Finch is at number 12, acting oddly. He's carrying a parcel, and I don't trust him." Harris frowned but grabbed his cap. "All right, miss, let's see what he's up to." They reached Sycamore Street just as Finch emerged, the parcel gone. He saw them and froze, his face pale. "Constable," he said, his voice smooth but tight, "I was just checking on my cousin's house." Harris crossed his arms. "You've been asking a lot about Mrs. Gray, Mr. Finch. Care to explain?" Finch's eyes flicked to Miss Marple, then back. "I told you, I'm settling her affairs. She's likely in France. I'll be off to London tonight." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "So soon? A cousin should be more worried, surely." Finch's smile was thin. "I've done what I can." He tipped his hat and walked to the station. His steps too quick. Miss Marple turned to Harris. "He's not here for family, Robert. He's searching for something. Maybe that emerald." Harris scratched his head. "You think he's after a jewel? Sounds like a story, miss." "Stories often hold truth," she replied, thinking of her nephew Raymond's tales of greed and secrets. She asked Harris to watch Finch, then returned home, the Fates noise fading behind her. At her cottage, she sat by the fire, the clues spread on her table, the photograph's emerald ring, the letter's warning, the mill's lantern and button, the grey wool scrap. The newspaper's story of the Star of Bombay fit too neatly to be chance. She thought of Mrs. Gray, scared and alone, meeting someone at the mill. The emerald was the key, but to what? A fortune, a crime, a betrayal. Miss Marple's fingers traced the letter's smudged ink. Tomorrow she'd talk to Tommy Bell again. He might have seen more. A footprint, a whisper, a dropped coin, small things, she knew, could crack a mystery open. As the fire glowed, Sycamore Street's silence seemed to hum, and Miss Marple was listening. Chapter 7. The Silence. Broken. The dawn light slipped through the curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage, painting her parlour in soft pinks and golds. She sat by the window, her tea untouched, her sharp eyes fixed on the quiet of Sycamore Street, the clues she'd gathered, the burned photograph, the letter about an emerald, the broken lantern at the mill, the grey wool scrap, the brass button, the newspaper's tale of a stolen gem, had woven a pattern in her mind. Mrs. Elspeth Gray's disappearance, Mr. Finch's sly questions, and the stranger in the grey coat were threads in a mystery now pulling tight. Today, Miss Marple felt, the silence of Sycamore Street would break. She pinned her straw hat, its ribbon worn but neat, and draped her shawl over her shoulders. The village was waking, with the bakery's warm bread smell drifting through the air and sparrows chirping in the hedges. Her plan was simple. Find Tommy Bell, the paper boy who'd seen the stranger at the mill. Boys like Tommy noticed things, and one more detail might unlock the truth. As she stepped outside, her stick tapped the path, steady as her thoughts. Sycamore Street was still. Number 12 dark and locked. Miss Marple paused at the gate, noting a fresh scuff in the dirt. Someone had been there since yesterday. She found Tommy at the postbox, his bicycle leaning against a fence, his cap crooked. "Morning, Miss Marple," he said, tossing a newspaper to a porch. "You're out early again." "Good morning, Tommy," she replied, offering a peppermint from her bag. "I need your sharp eyes. That night you saw Mrs. Gray at the mill. Did you notice anything else? A sound, a shadow, anything odd?" Tommy chewed the candy, his brow furrowing. "Now you mention it, miss. I heard something after Mrs. Gray passed. A rustle, like someone moving in the bushes. Then I saw that man in the grey coat again, near the mill. He was back last night, too, I was out fishing, and there he was, sneaking around with another man. Looked like Mr. Finch, but it was dark." Miss Marple's heart jumped, but her face stayed calm. "2 men at the mill? You're sure?" Tommy nodded. "They were arguing, low voices, about something shiny. I hid behind a tree, didn't want them to see me." Miss Marple thanked him, her mind racing. Mr. Finch and the stranger, together at the mill, after something shiny. The emerald, no doubt. She thought of her nephew Raymond's detective stories, where thieves fought over stolen loot. She hurried to Constable Harris's station, finding him sipping tea, his boots polished. "Robert," she said, her voice firm, "Tommy saw Mr. Finch and a man in a grey coat at the mill last night, arguing. I think Mrs. Gray's in danger. We need to go there, now." Harris set down his cup, his face serious. "You sure, miss? That's a big claim." "Trust me," she said, her eyes steady. Harris grabbed his cap and called Mr. Haydock, the doctor, for his car. The 3 set off, the car rattling along the narrow road to the mill. The morning was cool, the river glinting under the sun. The mill loomed ahead, its stones mossy, its wheel still. Miss Marple led the way, her stick sinking into the mud. The footprints she'd seen before were joined by new ones, deeper, more hurried. Inside, the air was damp, smelling of rot and river water. The broken lantern still lay in the corner, but fresh marks scarred the floor, drag marks leading to a pile of sacks. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "Look there," she whispered, pointing. Harris moved the sacks, revealing a trapdoor, its hinges rusty but recently opened. He pulled it up, and a faint moan drifted from below. Haydock held his lantern, its light spilling into a small cellar. There, tied to a chair, was Mrs. Elspeth Gray, her face pale, her dress torn. She blinked at the light, her voice weak. "Help, please." Harris and Haydock untied her, lifting her gently. "She's alive," Haydock said, checking her pulse. "Cold and shaken, but no serious harm." Miss Marple knelt beside her, offering a sip of water from Haydock's flask. Mrs. Gray's eyes were wide, her hands trembling. "Elspeth," Miss Marple said softly, "you're safe now. Can you tell us what happened?" Mrs. Gray's voice was faint. "A man. He wanted the ring. Said it was his. I met him at the mill, but he hit me, tied me here." She shuddered, tears falling. Miss Marple patted her hand, her mind sharp. "Rest now. We'll sort this out." She turned to Harris. "Robert, we need to find those men. They're still at the mill." As if on cue, voices echoed outside, low, angry. Harris crept to the doorway, Miss Marple and Haydock behind. In the clearing, Mr. Finch stood with a rough-looking man in a grey coat, his hat low. They were arguing over a small box, its lid open, a green gem glinting inside. "You said we'd split it, Carter," Finch snapped, his voice sharp. "You got greedy, Finch," the other man growled, his hand in his pocket. "The emerald's mine." Harris stepped out, his voice firm. "Hands up, both of you." Finch froze, his face pale, but Carter bolted, only to trip over a root. Harris tackled him, cuffing his wrists. Finch raised his hands, his smile thin. "A misunderstanding, Constable," he said, but his eyes were cold. Miss Marple stepped forward, her stick steady. "No misunderstanding, Mr. Finch. You're no cousin. You and this man, Carter, is it, were after Mrs. Gray's emerald. You planned to sell it, didn't you?" Finch's jaw tightened, but Carter spat. She wouldn't give it up. Kept saying it was her husband's, that it was cursed. I only meant to scare her at the mill, but she fought, so I hid her. Harris hauled them to the car, Mrs. Gray leaning on Haydock. At the station, Finch broke, his voice low. "I'm not her cousin," he admitted. "I knew her husband, Captain Gray. He stole the Star of Bombay years ago, hid it in that ring. Elspeth wouldn't sell, so I got Carter to pressure her. He went too far." Mrs. Gray, wrapped in a blanket, nodded. "The ring was all I had of him. I knew it was stolen, but I couldn't let it go. They tricked me to the mill, and Carter, he locked me away." Miss Marple listened, her eyes soft but sharp. The newspaper's story, the letter, the ring, it all fit. She thought of her friend Mrs. Bantry, who'd say greed always tripped itself up. Harris took the emerald, locking it in the station safe. "This goes to the authorities," he said. "No more trouble." Back at her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, the village settling into evening. Sycamore Street was alive again. Children laughed, Mr. Harrow's van rumbled, Mrs. Price's tea shop hummed. Number 12's curtains were open, Mrs. Gray safe, at home. Miss Marple picked up her knitting, the needles clicking softly. The clues, photograph, letter, lantern, button, had led her to the truth. Small things, she knew, could unravel big secrets. As the fire glowed, she smiled. "People," she murmured, "are never as clever as they think."